Right now, there are hundreds of millions of computers running an operating system that Microsoft has abandoned. Windows 10 support ended on October 14th, 2025. No more security patches, no more fixes. And Microsoft's answer to every single one of those people is the same. Buy a new computer, spend the money, upgrade to Windows 11, or sit there, exposed, and hope nothing goes wrong. Most of you watching this already know there is another option, Linux. You have heard me talk about it. You have probably thought about trying it. But here is where the whole thing falls apart, and nobody talks about this enough. You download one Linux distribution, you find a tutorial, you figure out how to burn it to a USB stick, you boot it up, and it does not feel right. Maybe the desktop looks strange, maybe your printer does not work, maybe it just is not what you expected. So you give up. You go back to Windows, and Microsoft wins again. Not because Windows is better, because trying the alternative is too much hassle. There is a free tool that eliminates that problem entirely. One USB stick, every Linux distribution you want to try. No reformatting, no technical expertise, no commitment whatsoever. And what I am going to show you about who built it and how popular it actually is, that part genuinely surprised me. The tool is called Ventoy. It is free, it is open source, and on GitHub, where developers share and rate open source software, Ventoy has accumulated over 77,000 stars. To put that in perspective, that makes it the fourth most popular project written in the C programming language on all of GitHub. It is more popular than Redis, which powers the backends of some of the biggest websites in the world. It is more popular than OBS Studio, which is the software most streamers and content creators use to broadcast. A tool that most Windows users have never heard of is, among developers, one of the most respected pieces of software on the entire internet. Here is what it does. Normally, when you want to try a Linux distribution, you take a USB drive and you use a tool like Rufus to write that one operating system onto it. The USB gets formatted. Everything else on it is erased. You get one operating system per USB stick. If you want to try a second distribution, you have to reformat the entire drive and start over. Ventoy changes that completely. You install Ventoy on a USB drive once. Then you simply drag and drop ISO files. Those are the installation images for operating systems, directly onto the drive, as many as you want. When you boot from that USB, Ventoy presents a menu listing every single operating system on the drive. You pick one, it boots, you try it. If you do not like it, you reboot and try the next one. The USB still works as a regular storage drive for your normal files at the same time. Ventoy has been tested with over 1,300 operating system images. 1,300. That is more than any person could try in a lifetime. And every single one of them can sit on one USB stick, ready to boot, without reformatting anything. Microsoft charges you for one operating system. This single USB drive could hold over 1,000 alternatives for free. But the story of who actually built this and why it almost did not survive is something most people do not know. Ventoy was created by a Chinese developer named Hailong Sun, who goes by the username Longpanda on GitHub. He released the first version on April 5th, 2020. Not backed by a corporation, not funded by venture capital. One person solving a problem that millions of people had been dealing with for years. The problem itself is older than most people realize. For decades, the process of creating a bootable USB drive meant dedicating that entire drive to a single operating system. The industry treated this as normal. If you wanted to test 5 Linux distributions, you either needed 5 USB drives or you needed to reformat one drive 5 times. Every major tool worked this way. Rufus, Etcher, UNetbootin, and the DD command on Linux. All of them operated on the same assumption: one drive, one operating system. What Longpanda recognized was that this assumption was unnecessary. An ISO file is just a file. There is no technical reason it needs to be extracted and written across an entire drive. If you could build a bootloader smart enough to read ISO files directly, you could store as many as your drive had space for and boot any of them on demand. That is exactly what Ventoy does. It installs a custom bootloader on the USB drive and creates a large data partition. You copy ISO files onto that partition like you would copy any other file. The bootloader handles the rest. The process is almost comically simple compared to every other method. You download Ventoy from ventoy.net. The installer is about 16 megabytes. You run it, select your USB drive, and click Install. Ventoy formats the drive once and creates two partitions, a small boot partition and a large data partition that takes up the rest of the drive. From that point forward, you never need to run the Ventoy installer again. You just open the data partition in your file explorer and copy ISO files onto it the way you would copy photos or documents. No special writing process. No waiting for a burn to complete. Drag, drop, done. The supported hardware list is remarkably broad. Ventoy works with x86 legacy BIOS systems, 32-bit UEFI, 64-bit UEFI, ARM, 64 UEFI, and even MIPS, 64 ELU-EFI. It handles ISO, WIM, IMG, VHD, and EFI file formats. The installer runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And the entire project is released under the GPL version 3 license. But this story nearly took a very different turn, and the controversy that erupted around Ventoy is something every open source user should understand. In the open source community, there is an unwritten rule. If you release software under an open source license, people expect to be able to verify exactly what the software does by reading the source code. For years, parts of Ventoy contained binary blobs, pre-compiled pieces of code that could not be easily inspected or reproduced. Members of the open source community raised concerns. They could not fully verify what Ventoy's bootloader was doing at the deepest level of your system, which is exactly the level where trust matters most. This became a serious credibility issue. Some Linux distributions hesitated to recommend Ventoy. Security-conscious users flagged it as a potential risk. The Wikipedia article for Ventoy still carries a notice questioning the factual accuracy of how its open source status is described. It is classified as partially open source rather than fully open source. Longpanda eventually responded by listing the binary components and providing build instructions, but critics pointed out that those instructions were difficult to reproduce. The debate has not fully resolved. It sits in that uncomfortable middle ground where the tool works brilliantly. Millions of people rely on it, but the purists in the community have a legitimate point about transparency. Here is why I am telling you this. I believe in being honest with you. Ventoy is one of the most useful tools I have ever covered on this channel. But if someone in the comments tells you there are unresolved questions about its binary components, they are right. That is a real discussion. For the average person switching from Windows to Linux, the practical risk is very low. Ventoy has been downloaded millions of times and scrutinized by thousands of developers. But you deserve to know the full picture. And there is a reason I bring this up now, rather than burying it at the end. Because what comes next only matters if you trust the tool first. When Microsoft ended Windows 10 support in October 2025, it did not just affect a few stragglers. According to StatCounter data, Windows 10 still held over 40% of the Windows desktop market at the time of the cutoff. An estimated 240 million devices could not officially upgrade to Windows 11 because they did not meet the hardware requirements, the TPM 2.0 chip, the secure boot configuration, the specific CPU generation Microsoft demanded. Think about that number, 240 million computers, perfectly functional machines. And Microsoft's position was, these are not good enough for our new operating system. Buy new ones. For people who had been using those computers for years with no performance complaints, this felt like exactly what it was. Planned obsolescence wrapped in a security justification. Microsoft did offer a paid extended security updates program at $30 per year for home users, but that only buys 12 months of patches before the price goes up again. It is a bandage, not a solution. And for many people, paying Microsoft to keep supporting an operating system they have already paid for felt like a shakedown. The reaction was measurable. A campaign called End of 10 emerged, led partly by people involved in the Linux community and the KDE project, explicitly encouraging Windows 10 users to switch to Linux, rather than buy new hardware. Zorin OS, a Linux distribution specifically designed to look and feel familiar to Windows users, reported a significant surge in downloads in the weeks after the October cutoff. Valve's Steam platform recorded Linux crossing the 3% market share barrier for the first time in October 2025. These are small numbers in absolute terms, but the trend line was unmistakable. And this is exactly where Ventoy becomes not just useful, but essential. Because the single biggest barrier for every one of those potential switchers is the same barrier it has always been: fear of choosing the wrong distribution. Linux Mint looks different from Zorin OS, which looks different from Ubuntu, which looks different from Fedora. They all work differently, they all feel differently, and if the only way to try each one is to reformat a USB drive every single time, most people will try one, maybe two, and then stop. Ventoy removes that barrier entirely, but the real impact of that, the human impact, is something I have seen play out in our own comment section. After I published the Rufus video, which as of now has been watched over 41,000 times, something happened in the comments that I did not expect. One commenter specifically mentioned Ventoy, said it was a game changer. That comment received 18 likes. That might sound small, but on this channel, 18 likes on a comment means dozens or even hundreds of people read it and nodded. They recognize something. What I have learned from reading thousands of comments on this channel over the past year is that our audience falls into a very specific pattern. You are not 25-year-old tech enthusiasts. Most of you are over 45. Many of you are over 60. You have been using Windows since the 90s. You know your way around a computer, but you are not interested in spending your weekends debugging driver conflicts. You want something that works. And for decades, Windows was that thing, until it was not. The emails I get tell the same story over and over again. Someone watches a video about Linux. They get curious. They download Linux Mint because everyone recommends it. They figure out how to burn it to a USB. They boot it up. The Wi-Fi does not connect, or the display resolution looks wrong, or the file manager feels unfamiliar, and they think, that is it. Linux does not work for me. Back to Windows. But here is what they never found out. Linux Mint might not have been the right distribution for their specific hardware. Zorin OS might have worked perfectly, or Ubuntu, or Pop! OS, or any of the dozens of distributions designed for different hardware configurations and different user preferences. They did not fail at Linux. They failed at the process of finding the right version of Linux. And that process failed them because it required reformatting a USB drive for every single attempt. Nobody has that kind of patience. Nobody should need to. Ventoy turns that experience from a series of dead ends into a menu. 1 USB drive, 10 distributions. Boot 1, try it for 20 minutes. Reboot, try the next. Your Windows installation stays completely untouched on your hard drive the entire time. Total risk to your existing setup, 0. That is not a technical improvement. That is the difference between someone going back to an abandoned operating system and someone finding the Linux distribution that actually fits their life. Now, in fairness, let me give you the full honest assessment, because I will not sit here and pretend Ventoy is perfect. The optimistic case is strong. Ventoy has been actively maintained for over 6 years. Version 1.1.12 was released on April the 23rd, 2026, just weeks ago. The project has 77,000 GitHub stars and a global community of users testing it across an extraordinary range of hardware. It is genuinely one of the simplest tools you can use. The install process takes less than a minute, and after that, you are just copying files. It works on legacy BIOS and modern UEFI systems. It supports secure boot. For the vast majority of people switching from Windows to Linux, it works exactly as advertised. The limitations are real but manageable. Occasionally, a specific ISO file does not boot correctly through Ventoy due to the way that particular distribution packaged its installer. This is rare, and Ventoy has a compatibility plugin system that usually resolves it, but it can happen. When you first install Ventoy on a USB drive, it formats the drive completely, so you need to back up anything on that drive before you start. That catches people off guard if they do not read the warning. And Ventoy does not include the Windows bypass features that Rufus offers, like skipping the TPM requirement or the Microsoft account requirement. If bypassing Windows 11 restrictions is your goal, Rufus is still the tool for that. The honest framing is that Ventoy and Rufus are companion tools, not competitors. Ventoy is for exploration, loading up a USB with multiple operating systems and figuring out which one you want. Rufus is for execution, taking the one you chose and installing it cleanly. A smart workflow uses both. If you are putting together a Ventoy USB drive for the first time and you are coming from Windows, here is what I would suggest loading onto it. Linux Mint, because it is the most commonly recommended distribution for Windows switchers, and it has the largest support community. Zorin OS, because it is specifically designed to look and feel like Windows and removes the visual shock of switching to something unfamiliar. Ubuntu, because it has the broadest hardware compatibility and the most online troubleshooting resources. If something goes wrong, someone has already written about the fix. And one wildcard, maybe Fedora or Pop! OS, just to see what a slightly different approach feels like. A 32GB USB drive will hold all of those with room to spare. A 64GB drive will hold those plus a dozen more, plus your regular files. One USB stick. Your entire escape route from Windows. No commitment required. I started this video by telling you that most people try one Linux distribution, it does not feel right, and they go back to Windows. That is the single biggest reason Microsoft is still sitting comfortably with 70+% of the desktop market. Not because Windows is the best option, because trying the alternatives has always been just hard enough to stop people in their tracks. Ventoy is the tool that breaks that cycle. One free download, one USB drive, 1,300 verified compatible operating systems, and a developer in China who saw a problem that the entire tech industry had accepted as normal and decided to fix it anyway. No subscription, no account, no telemetry, no data collection, just a bootloader and a menu. The entire download is smaller than a single smartphone photo. Next week, I am going to walk you through the exact step-by-step process of building a Ventoy USB drive, loading it with the best Linux distributions for Windows switchers, and booting it on a real computer. No virtual machines, no shortcuts. The same process you would follow sitting at your own desk. If you want to be ready for that, download Ventoy from ventoy.net, grab a USB drive with at least 16GB of space, and have it ready. If this channel has been useful to you, if these videos have helped you understand what Microsoft is doing and what your real options are, the single most important thing you can do is subscribe. Not because I need the number, because this content does not get recommended to the people who need it most unless the algorithm sees that people are watching. Every subscription tells the system that someone out there wants to hear the truth about technology, not just what the largest companies want them to hear. I started this video with hundreds of millions of abandoned computers. I am ending it with a $16 USB stick that gives every one of those computers a second life. Microsoft did not plan for that, but somebody did.